Hey there, everyone, and we are live. Welcome to another Seattle Data Guy live. Today with me, we've got Lindsay. How are you doing, Lindsay?
Good, good. Happy to be
Good.
here.
Yeah. No, I'm excited to kind of have you on. I've definitely seen you post a decent amount and seen you kind of change at various roles. Again, I think you're at Dakota, now at
hmm
Hive. But so yeah, I've got a lot of questions in terms of working in data.
hmm
But any thoughts you have jumping on?
Yeah, no, just excited to be here. Yeah, I've been following your work for a long time, so it's fun to be on the show finally.
Yeah, yeah. So just to dive into it, the first question I usually like to ask people, just is what do you do, or what do you kind of do outside of data?
hmm Yeah, I mean, I try to stay active, so I play ultimate frisbee
All right,
between seasons right now, but that's for someone I didn't play sports growing up, so it's my sport as an adult.
nice.
And then learning how to golf. I like learned how to golf during COVID, and I golf sometimes with my husband. I'm terrible, as everyone knows. Golf is like a lifelong thing that you're usually terrible at. And then yeah, we go to like concerts and stuff here in Toronto whenever we can.
Oh,
And
nice.
then I podcast a little bit. So I have a podcast called Women Lead Data. So that's the other thing that keeps me busy on the side.
Yeah. Uh, I I find that, like, again, podcasts, it feels like something that in some ways shouldn't be too heavy.
Mm,
You're like, oh, I just have to find guests and talk to them. I don't. Maybe you do prep, maybe you don't.
yeah.
But keeping guests and keeping your guest pipeline full is a full time job.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And then editing, I find like you somehow become a perfectionist with editing. You're like trying to fix every little thing. It's like this is not a full-time job, so if it doesn't sound great, that's okay.
yeah, yes. In terms of data,
Mhm.
what like how did you get into data? Like what was the path?
Yeah, I'm one of those people who have been in data for a little while now, so it's getting close to like 15 years. So back when I started out in data, there was not really courses for this, or there wasn't really education paths, and so I'm one of those people who sort of fell into it a little bit. I actually took like psychology and
Mm,
biology in undergrad, but in psychology, I was more on the science side of things. And so I was doing a lot of human research and human studies. And so behavioral statistics was a big part of that, working with toddlers and like recording data from their literal, like their interactions with humans. And so it was very cool, but it was like super small data sets.
yeah,
And so it was interesting, but if you wanted to run a study, it would take, you know, almost like 3 or 4 years sometimes.
yeah.
Um, and so I ended up kind of getting interested in Facebook insights. Like we created a Facebook page to like recruit children for this
Oh,
psychology lab that I worked at. And I was in the back end of Facebook and I was seeing all this data and I was kind of like, oh my gosh, this data is like all for free and like you get so much of it. And so I kind of got interested in social media data and ended up applying to a job as a data coordinator
mm,
at a company that does not exist anymore. It was a startup, it was called SynCaps, and they are a little bit like Hootsuite. So they were kind of like an
okay.
aggregator for social media data. And so that's kind of where I fell into a data role, and I learned SQL, and we had like an on-premise Oracle database and all that kind of stuff. Learned some data modeling, and then I ended up working as a data analyst for many years after that company. So yeah, the rest is
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, I would say, people who kind of came into data, especially, anywhere from like 2000 to 2015, 20, maybe
hmm
18, the paths definitely were less clear.
Yeah.
People kind of, the term data engineer or some of these other terms that people like to use, data scientist, weren't as big. 2012, I guess, was kind of the like beginning of hype for data
Yeah.
scientists. So yeah, I do find that trend, that people are like, yeah, I kind of, it's not to say fell into it, but like you kind of started to like it. You're like, oh, this
Yeah.
is kind of fun. It kind of hits some of the things I'm interested in. For you, it sounds like more from the experimentation side and like, doing psychology. Then you brought up
Mhm.
Facebook, and I was like, yeah, talking about psychological experiments run on mass scale.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's interesting that company SynCaps, actually we had access to the same data that Cambridge Analytica was using. So we were using the same kind of data. So we had like the friends of friends graph and all that kind of stuff. But we were using it for clustering analysis to understand, if somebody likes Ciroc vodka, like what kinds of rappers did they listen to, stuff like that. And so it was like
Yeah.
totally focused on marketing, not like swinging political elections and stuff like that. But when that whole scandal came out, me and all my friends that used to work there were messaging each other, being like, "Oh my god, this is like the same data that we had. That's crazy." So
Yes. Yeah,
kind of
definitely. Like, I
kind of
think, what
cool.
was it, like 2014 or something, or I don't remember when it was, that Facebook kind of had that, their API was so open
Yeah,
in terms of like what you could pull. I was,
yeah,
it's
crazy
crazy
amounts of
now,
data. Hmm.
but I remember I was like thinking about, like, I'm like, oh, you could do a startup where maybe you could like better recommend people's gifts, because you could like know everyone in the
Yeah,
graph, and you would know when their birthdays were, and then you would know what they kind of like.
for
And then I
sure.
think when I finally started to build it, they had locked down the API, and then I was like, wait, now I can't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They figured it out a little bit too late, but yeah.
Yeah. It's very it was a different time back then.
Hmm. For
Data was
sure.
all very, very open.
Hmm.
In terms of, like, now I've looking at your background, you've kind of led a few different data teams across companies. Would you say there are any similarities or challenges across those various organizations?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I will preface this question by saying that I have worked at startups for the last several years. And so generally, like, the company size is still pretty small. And so the problems that I face are probably very different than like if you were in an enterprise.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are some similarities. Some of the main things that like I've noticed or seen as challenges, not necessarily at Hive, but at other startups that I've been at, is getting things off the ground. Like if you're the
Mm,
first data hire, you kind of have to make that like that first pitch of sort of like, why should we invest in this? And sometimes that can be really hard. I've actually been in that position when I was like relatively junior. Like I started as a analytics manager and then was promoted into a director role, but I didn't hadn't really mastered that skill of how to convince people or convince leadership of like why they should invest in something. And so it was kind of a struggle to get things off the ground, and we got there eventually. So I think like patience was probably another skill I had to develop.
mm,
Um, but across all companies that I've worked at, is like I think stakeholder management is probably always the big category that I think of as well. As you have to be very careful to not fall into this like support function trap.
mm,
And it's so easy to do, right? Like people, they come to you, they ask for something, you ship it, and you just do exactly what they asked for. And then all of a sudden you're like an IT department that's just like churning out tickets. When in reality, like if you want to have a really high value data team that is seen as a strategic partner, that's a totally different relationship with the business. So that one seems to be like a challenge at every company that I've worked at, because it's just like how it's just much easier to do the support function thing. So and then I think the other piece that I think of is whether you're building internal data products or external or like production facing data products. I think the challenges are quite different.
mm.
So internal BI, that type of stuff tends to have, I don't want to say like less data quality needs. I think the data quality needs are still there. It's just like acceptable if things are a little bit slower or
Yeah.
there's mistakes and things, and you can fix it because it's all internal. Versus if it's an external facing data product and it's something that pitches your customers, like that's a totally different requirement, right? So um and then the other thing I would say is probably product analytics is always a struggle at startups.
Yeah.
Typically, what happens is like someone somewhere has like slapped some event tracking code in somewhere, and they're just capturing data, and it gets to this point where it becomes a big enough of a problem that the company will invest in improving it. But it's like every startup that I've worked at, it's usually like the engineering team has just thrown a bunch of events in, and then it's the data team's job to figure it out later, and half the stuff's broken, and there's always a bit of an evolution there.
Yeah. No, I can feel pretty much most of those points at some point. One thing I wanted to kind of dig into is getting buy-in. Like, what does that look like? What were the challenges specifically that you faced, like trying to get people to invest more into like the data function?
Yeah, I think for me, like what I learned pretty early on was like you have to sort of like start very small and show some quick wins, and then start to kind of like build up with your asks. One of the like stupid mistakes that I still remember I made in one of my first in that first role where I was a manager and then was promoted. I was like I went in and like asked for like Looker as a BI tool as like my first tool out of the gate,
Mm,
and like we hadn't even really built anything BI wise, and so it was like you're asking for, I think at the time it was like a $30,000
all
contract
right.
annually.
Yeah.
And it's like, of course, I got laughed at. It was just kind of like, we're not giving you that money. Like, what do you haven't even shown us what you can do yet? And so it's kind of like you need to sort of start very small, like look for open source or like cheaper options. And so I think what we ended up doing was going with like Google Data Studio. And so at the time, that was definitely not what I wanted, but it was like, it was a much easier solution that we could kind of show a little bit of, get some quick wins and then start to gain traction and show value. So I think it's just like flipping that, like, show as much value as you can before asking for an investment,
Yeah.
is really kind of a reframing of it. And then I think it's also learning to speak the language of leadership, and so putting things in like aligning yourself to business impact, or aligning yourself to OKRs if your company has that, or other things that is going to help an executive see the value, rather than you just saying like, hey, we want this new tool or this new capability, but they don't see how it connects to something they actually care about.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like sometimes, like, one, there's the side of like, if you do get quick wins, then people will start using that technology, and they'll be like, we hate it, and so now then
Yeah,
if it's
exactly.
valuable, they'll be like, okay, we'll invest in getting a better version of this because we don't like the current one, but we like what it's doing.
Hmm.
We just don't like its limitations. Or the other side, kind of like you talk about product analytics, is like you kind of wait until it's such a cluster that people are like, all right, we'll invest in it because this is just so bad,
Yeah,
and we have to
exactly.
fix it. So
Yeah,
those
sometimes
are,
timing is everything, right? That's again the patience thing. It's like you know it could be a lot better, but you just have to sort of wait until enough people are on your side of like, this sucks and we need to fix it now.
yeah, that goes back to the whole, like you said, patience. And
Yeah.
when you say patience, is that like a 3 month thing? Is that a 12-month thing? Like, what's the timeline?
Yeah, I feel like the cop out answer there is that, like, it depends, right? It really
Yeah,
depends on what it is and what the situation is. I think it depends on the company too, like how innovative your company is and how fast your company's moving. And I've worked at companies which are very ambitious, like almost too ambitious, that they want to 10x every goal they have. And then I've worked at other companies that didn't really grow in size in the 2 years that I was there, and that was fine. They were very like they were conservative about their growth, and that was kind of their approach. But very different in terms of how they would want to invest in things or think about things. And also the business model too. Like, is your company a SaaS product that's like very, very sales driven? They're probably not going to care about data as much versus something that's very product driven. They need data to make decisions. If it's a B2C versus B2B company, B2C most likely will have more needs for data, in my opinion, in my experience. So, yeah, some of those things can sometimes dictate how patient you have to be, and also whether you want to work there. I think that's another
yeah,
good thing, is when you're deciding where you want to work, make sure it aligns with the things you want to be doing and the interests that you have.
yeah. No, I love all that. So beyond, like, you've talked about, I think, a lot of other skills that go beyond just technical skills. So what do you find are kind of the most valuable things and skills that day leaders can kind of have?
Hmm. Yeah, I think the big one that I was talking about earlier is influence, and that one is one that I'm still constantly learning. I think even as somebody who's kind of worked with a lot of executives now, I still find myself sometimes like putting myself in my own viewpoint and like just speaking, making an argument from why I think you should do something, instead of, being empathetic, thinking about putting yourself in the shoes of a different stakeholder or an executive, and figuring out how can you influence that person. I think also using stakeholders to help you influence. So sometimes if you are new at a company or you're more junior, you can't go directly to the C level and like start asking for things and thinking that you're going to have influence on those people. You sort of need to think about uh, who can I work with, or who can be a champion with me? Who might, is there another founder, another senior leader who I might be able to get the ear of and get that person on my side of my point of view, and help me negotiate, and make those cases. So I think that's a big one, and it's a hard one to learn for sure. The other big ones are like second order thinking. You're kind of thinking about like, if I make this decision now, what might that impact down the road?
Mm,
And so sometimes, a certain tool that you want to choose, it's sometimes not like a one way door decision or a two-way door decision, right? It's like, if you're going to go all in on this one tool, it's going to be a really big migration effort to move off of that. And so thinking about, if we go with this, what are the knock-on effects? How long is this going to service my team and the needs of the business over the next like 2 to 3 years, for example, versus maybe something that's like a smaller decision.
yeah. Okay. Um, in terms of, maybe getting people on your side, you referenced quick wins earlier. Are there other things that you've kind of picked up, or techniques you've learned, how to kind of get people to, you know, be bought into probably both your data team, but also a little bit of you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that goes back to your communication a lot of times too. Like, if you don't want to be someone who is talking constantly about your data or the data stack, or you're talking very specifically about very tactical things, you need to sort of learn to elevate your conversation up to a level that is more on the level of the business, so that then they're I think respect for your communication goes a long way. People that understand what you're talking about and that you're speaking their language, they're going to be able to be a lot more bought into what you're saying. And then I think it's also just focusing on stakeholders. So there's something that in one of my recent podcast episodes, Akia Obas, she's from Netlify, she was talking about the stakeholder engagement matrix, which I
Mm,
think is something that she learned when she was at HubSpot. And so it's just like a 2 by 2 quadrant of people who have high influence in a business and then high impact. And whether those people actually like believe in data or not. And so, don't treat all stakeholders equally. If you have, that's maybe more of a prioritization thing, but if you've got requests that are coming from people who don't really have a lot of influence in the business but really want data, they're going to keep you very busy, but they're not really going to help you to like
mm,
elevate your visibility in the business. And so try to focus on those people who are really bought into data but have a lot of influence. And I think that's how you can kind of uh, you know partner with the correct people in the business to sort of elevate your own profile a bit.
yeah, yeah. That I actually haven't seen that matrix. I'll have to go look it
Mm.
up because
Hmm.
it sounds interesting. I imagine the challenge there is like, did you talk at all about maybe how to balance that? Because I imagine you can't say no to like just because someone has low influence. So I'm just
Yeah.
curious if there are any thoughts there.
Yeah, I think in those cases, like I try to go back to whoever their leader is. So if there's somebody that's like trying to keep my data team very, very busy, I'll go back and I'll sort of speak to like, okay, well, who is this person's manager? Who is the head of this department? And sort of just check in and kind of have those relationships built up so that I can sort of say like, is this a priority for you? Is this important for you? And then that they can sometimes be the person who goes back and says, back off on the data team, or like, maybe consolidate some of these requests, or some of these things actually aren't important right now. That's usually the way that I try to go about that. Or another option is to proactively get in front of each department. And so in the past, we don't have this set up yet at Hive, but in the past, I would have cadence meetings with different departments, and I would invite the department lead to those meetings, so that then you're getting more, you're getting ahead of things. You're a little bit less reactive. You get to hear more of the conversation from the leader on what's important to them and what's coming down the pipe, and then some of that stuff ends up like working its way out of your request pipeline, I find.
Ah, nice. um, one of the things that when I talk to business executives in some cases, um, that one of the issues that I've kind of heard a lot is they feel like their data team is either not doing well or maybe not succeeding in the way that they want. I don't know if I've heard anyone define what maybe for them good success is. So I'm curious, like,
Mhm.
what do you view as success for a data organization, and like how would you kind of measure it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I feel like from a qualitative perspective, I would say feeling like you, at least not feeling like your team's on the back foot all the time. And I guess you could measure this by looking at how many incoming requests you have. If your team is like bombarded with ad hoc requests all the time, that would be probably a good negative measure to me, to tell you that you're not keeping in line with the business of what's coming down the pipeline, or is there more self-serve opportunity that you could be building data products so that people could be answering those questions on their own and educating them on how to do that? And so that might be one thing, is like how reactive is your data team, and whichever way you're measuring that. I think having more of a proactive data team is probably the goal there, because that would mean that you are aligned with the business, and that your team also feels like they understand the priorities, they understand the impact that they're having, and they're not just getting stuff thrown at them.
Yeah. Um, in terms of like when you view self-service, do you, just because you brought it up, do you have a
Mhm.
definition of what you view it as? Because I feel, again, it's one of those things that gets thrown around a lot, but what have you kind of defined it as?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. We're kind of in the process right now of moving to a new BI tool. So we're moving off of Metabase to Omni, and so we are kind of going full in. If anyone's using Omni, or if you've used Looker in the past, you should be very familiar with Omni. Um, and so it's self-serve, in my opinion, is allowing people to answer their own basic questions from like a descriptive analysis standpoint. If the things that the business is going to be asking on a day to day, or building their own kind of dashboards and reports, when it comes to the basic things. I think the other kind of paradigm that we will probably lean into is sort of having like a champion in each
Mm,
department or each team that is sort of an expert, if you will. So they're kind of become like the person that you invest more time in, to make self serve a little bit more successful. But it definitely requires, like, you can't really be successful with that if you don't have good documentation, if you don't have, ongoing education sessions about how to use the product, but also to understand the data models that you've built. And then we actually followed a process when we've been building our data models, which I will give a shout out to Montreal Analytics Data Tonic team. They had done a presentation. I think it was like with the Serverless Toronto group or something. It's on YouTube,
Okay.
but it's like an overview of the Beam dimensional modeling. So Beam is Business Event Analytics Modeling, I think it stands for. And it's basically just a way to collaboratively design a dimensional data model. And so we actually followed this process this time around when we were kind of building things for Omni. And so what we did was we actually involved the stakeholders in, what are the processes and the things in the business that you want to be able to measure on a regular basis that are very important to your work and your day to day. And very obviously that covered like the common tables and production
Yeah.
tables that we have. But they got into the minutia of all the measures and dimensions and things that they would want to be able to measure. And we took that into how we built our models. And so that, I think, from a self-serve perspective, starts really at the planning stage. So they kind of know what you're going to be building, and they were part of the planning phase.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious. Do you then know Daniel? I actually don't know how to say his last name.
Yes. Yes.
Zvokovic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. No,
Yes. That
he's
it was. Yeah, it was him, and I'm trying to remember the name of the presenter. It's escaping me right now. But if anyone looks up Beam dimensional modeling, I think it's like one of the only videos that comes up on YouTube.
all right. Yeah, I'll have to dig into that later.
Hmm.
No, I was just talking to Daniel the other day. So,
Nice.
or he was on a meetup that we were doing virtually. So,
Nice.
and you say Toronto. I feel like the data space in Toronto must be kind of small, or data groups.
It's actually bigger than I think you would imagine.
Okay.
We used to run a meetup here. We haven't done it in a couple months now. But we had Toronto Modern Data Stack was the name of it. And I co-hosted it with Jonathan Talmy, if you're
Okay.
familiar with Jonathan. So between the two of us, we started this like 2 or 3 years ago, and the group had like 2,000 people in it. So I don't know if everybody
Whoa.
was like in Toronto. Obviously, that's not how many people we got at the meetups, but we would get like 150 people in some events. So
That's
yeah,
crazy.
people
That's a
people
big
are
deal.
really into data around here.
No, 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 that's awesome. I guess I more meant like it must be a tight group. Small with the wrong word. I meant more tight
Sure.
group.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Because it's
Definitely
got to
tight.
be. I mean, the data world's always smaller than you think it is,
It
but
is.
no,
Yeah.
it's awesome to kind of hear that. And I'm like,
There's a
no,
lot
that's
more people getting into it now. Like I do notice at these meetups that it's a lot of people kind of breaking into data for the first time. So the people who've been around for a while, if you haven't met each other yet, then it would be surprising.
yeah, yeah. At this point, it's I don't know. Everyone, it feels like everyone always knows each other.
Hmm.
Going back to kind of some of the questions, I guess you kind of referenced this a little bit in with your matrices answer, but how do you kind of handle situations where business leaders maybe want more data, right? Like we need more data, we want more, insights, but they haven't really articulated maybe the why or the questions they're actually trying to answer.
Yes, yeah, this is common, and I think a trap that sometimes I still fall into when you're busy and somebody asks you for something, and you're just kind of like, "Here you go, get out of my hair." But it's important to kind of stop it and sort of ask, like, "Why are you asking this question?" Or like, "What is the question behind the question?" Is what I always say to my teams and even to stakeholders. Is sort of, you're asking for this, but what are you actually trying to solve? And then trying to get them to sort of bring you along on that journey of their decision making. Um, I think that is a good first step. It's still challenging. So I think you still have a lot of back and forth, but that is sort of getting them to reframe it as, instead of them coming to you asking for a solution, they're coming to you with a problem, and then you get to determine what the best solution is, or at least work through that with them. And so that's, yeah, I think it goes back to communication skills for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um, cool. Uh, in terms of like maybe conversations you've had to have, what do you feel has been the hardest conversation you've had to have with an executive about maybe an investment in either the data team, some tooling, and how do you kind of navigate it?
Hmm. Yeah, I remember a specific experience at a company that I worked at a few years ago where I wanted to hire another person on the team, and the budget they were giving me was just not enough. And so trying to make that argument of sort of
Mm,
like, well, here's all the data online that shows me what this salary range should be for this role at this level that I want. And that just really wasn't going anywhere. And so I kind of was like, okay, well, I'll go out and see what I can do. I think that was actually the advice. They were like, well, go see what you can get. And so I ended up going through and hiring someone who was way too junior. They struggled in the role, and I ended up having to part ways with them. And so it was just
yeah,
kind of like, it was, a painful way to learn the lesson that I kind of felt in my gut from the beginning, that I should have put my foot down and just said, like, hey, if you're not going to give me the right budget for this, then we're just not going to make this hire, because it's
yeah,
just not the right decision. We had a very small team to begin with. I needed someone more at the intermediate level, and they just weren't giving the investment for that. And so now I think I'm a little bit more versed in sort of, being able to say, just here is what will happen if we don't make this investment, and putting it again back in that like leadership language of, you want this, I can't deliver on this without these certain things, and sort of putting your expectations out clearly for them. Again, it still may not go the way that you want, but I think then you've at least stated clearly, I'm not being set up for success, or I actually can't be successful in this current situation. And it just makes it a little more cut and dry. I think I was trying to be a little bit of a people pleaser in that situation, and it just ended up being kind of a bad experience for that individual and also myself. So,
yeah. No, I can imagine. Like, one, the business always wants things to work out the way they want them to work. It's like, yeah, of
yeah,
course you can find someone for this price.
for sure.
Um, I think there was a few other day leaders I was talking to, and they were kind of talking about how, if you interview, like, what the lessons they've learned is, like, if you interview anyone and they're like close, generally it's still a no. Like, if it's not a guarantee, like, it's just like,
Yeah.
it's like, if you're trying to like argue for it just to meet that gap, in their experience, it's usually not
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
good,
If it's
experience.
not a heck yes, then it's a no or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So
Yeah, I think too, like even with that, it's like having the business understand the technical aspect of that. Because maybe with a business role, there's more opportunity potentially sometimes for people to flex into those roles or grow into those roles. But if it's a technical role that has technical requirements and the person cannot do those, sure, they could learn it on the job, but they need someone to teach them, or they need the time to do that. And so I think that is also something that sometimes businesses don't understand, like that data is a technical role in a lot of ways. It's also a soft skill role as well, but there's technical aspects.
yeah. So I imagine that's probably part of it nowadays. It's like, look, we can hire this person. We're going to get a junior. It's going to take
Yeah,
them 3 to 6 months to even be, somewhere where you're going to be happy with what they're producing. Are you okay
yeah,
with that, or would you prefer paying someone more now
right.
to deliver, more value? So,
Yeah, for
which
sure.
generally I imagine the business is like, yes, we need more now,
Yeah, yeah,
especially for startups where
yeah.
everyone's just trying to get stuff done.
Hmm.
Yeah. Kind of on that, like, setting realistic expectations, trying to find that balance. How do you try to set realistic expectations around, like, timelines and scope, especially for people who are like non-technical or less technical, and they don't really maybe understand the gap between what they're asking for, right? And
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, this is definitely hard. I think like we're even challenged with this right now with like, a BI migration. It's like, how long does the BI migration take? It's like it's not something that's going to happen in like a short period of time. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed. So my approach has been to kind of plan the project as best as you can from the big picture, and then break it down into smaller milestones and chunks, and sort of give people a bit of a roadmap or a timeline based on that. If you can involve stakeholders in the planning as well, and kind of get them into like understanding what is going to be involved in each step, and communicating the expected timeline for those things, then I think that you can get a little bit more buy-in to help them understand, oh, actually all of these things do need to happen. Maybe we need to hire some people. And then I think also incremental delivery. So if there's things that you can deliver value in small pieces, then start to communicate about that. That often will buy you a little bit more time and graciousness and patience and things like that if people are getting like small pieces of value. So that's kind of the way that we've been rolling out Omni. Is sort of, it's been a very long process. We've planned, what were all the things in Metabase that have to be migrated? Who are all the people who are going to get access? What are all the models we're going to build? And then we've been like delivering things in phases so that people can get access to things slowly and start to learn. But it's not like this one big thing that we wait until the end to ship, essentially.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Generally, the Big Bang approach doesn't work out well.
No.
Are you like, with with migrations, the one thing I think I do often find, especially if you have a small team, it is something that generally requires pretty much all of the focus for a period of time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just end up picking it up. Then someone asks you for something, and then you
Yeah.
stop and do that, and then you're like, "Where were we on this migration?" Or you have to like hire someone to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not me giving you advice. It's just like I think I've just heard this now so many times where I'm like, yeah, we tried doing a migration. And it took us like
For
4 years.
sure.
And it's like you hear why, and it's like, oh, that makes
Yeah.
sense why it took so
Yeah.
long. But it's hard to get that.
Yeah.
How do you get that? Like, I guess that maybe that's the question I'm asking. Like, how do you get the business to understand, like, hey, we might not be making forward progress for the next 3 to 6 months, or however long the migration is.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely been challenging for us too, like in this example, is because we still have all of the like we're still maintaining Metabase while we have Omni, and then we still have people coming in with additional requests. And so it's definitely difficult to sort of be 100% focused on the migration all the time. But as much as possible, I try to shield my team, either push things off or like there's been specific examples where people have come in with a request and I'm like, if you wait like 2 weeks, you'll be able to do this yourself in Omni. And so then I've waited and I've held on to those tickets and those requests and I've actually reassigned them to the person. And then it became a bit of a success story of like, oh, they were able to do that themselves. And so, yeah, it's definitely not foolproof. I think if I were to go back on this particular project and think a little bit differently about it, I actually might think about having a few people who were dedicated to the
Mm,
project, and then maybe have some other people who were floaters or have people on a schedule who dealt with maybe ad hoc requests separately, so that people could focus on things. We've done well, for sure. I think we've actually it's a big project and we've still moved quickly, but
yeah.
startups always want to move faster. So
Yes. Yeah. Always want to be
yeah.
faster. Um, it is interesting. I do feel like I'm hearing more Omni and Sigma,
Hmm. Hmm.
less, not less Tableau and Power BI. I think enterprises will be with Tableau and Power BI for the next 5 years, probably. I wouldn't be like shook if that were the
Yeah.
case. But definitely, I think in either medium sized and startups, I think Omni and
Hmm.
Sigma have definitely got a decent hold
Yeah,
on the
for
field.
sure. For us, it was definitely like I had used Looker before, and so Omni definitely had a leg up in terms of our POC and assessment. But it does integrate very nicely with DBT. So there was a lot of things with Looker that DBT and Looker didn't necessarily play nice together, and so you had to do a lot of repetition of work. You do everything in DBT, and then have to do a bunch of stuff in Looker that felt very repetitive. It gets rid of a lot of that. But it is definitely like, I'm still thinking about right now, we're very focused on BI. Once we start focusing on some other things that are not so BI focused, are we going to wish that our semantic layer wasn't trapped inside of our business intelligence tool? We might get to that point. But again, that's maybe my second order thinking on that one will be kicked down the road a little bit. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah, yeah. It's too many trade offs
Yeah.
to make.
Hmm.
Speaking of technology, how do you try to keep up with it all? Especially as like trying to lead teams, trying to probably do some hands-on work. How do you try to keep up with what's going on in the technical world?
Yeah, it's definitely hard. Admittedly, I've been a little less involved in the community lately, but that was kind of the way that I tried to do this before. I'm like a very extroverted data person, so I like to get out and like talk to people and connect with people and make friends. So networking has been a big thing for me over the last several years, and so I'm in tons of Slack channels. I can't even keep up with how many there are anymore. I don't spend that much time in them right now, but I used to be more involved on LinkedIn. And then just having a networking group once a month with some other women leaders in data. And I just find it's a really good forum to sort of ask questions like, how are you handling this? What are problems that you're facing? That may not be the most cutting edge way of keeping up with things, but it is a nice way to sort of keep a sense of what are other people facing that are challenges. And then in terms of like industry trends and technologies, I try to get to. I was definitely in more conferences last year. That was kind of part of my last job, but I just got back from Data Council last week, so picking up on a few things there. Everybody's just talking about AI agents, so it's hard sometimes to like cut the marketing vendor noise from the actual stuff that like is going to matter and stick around.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have a great answer for that one, but I think just kind of perusing different channels online and then just knowing some good people to follow who are kind of on top of things.
Yeah. I guess with like the marketing and trying to cut through the BS.
Mhm.
How do you approach that? Because again, marketers gonna market,
Yeah.
salespeople gonna sell. How do you read past all of that?
I will tell you it's a lot easier now having been on the other side of it. I can kind of see when something feels like bullshit now a little bit more than I could before. Just because you kind of see like, oh yeah, we'll just say whatever we want to say, and maybe it's not true, or maybe it's not all based in like reality. But it's definitely a little bit easier now to sort of pick up on that marketing jargon. I do push vendors now pretty hard. Like if I'm at a conference and I'm talking to people at a booth, I'm like, well, what does this mean? You say that you can 8x this. Like, what's the data? Like, what drives that number? And then
Mm.
sometimes they'll just be like, admittedly, like our marketing team just wrote that number down. And so,
Wow.
yeah, so stuff like that. It's kind of like you really do want to not take things at face value. It's good to get excited about stuff, but if you're seeing things that are communicated in a marketing slide or in a demo to you and then they don't have any docs written on it, like it's probably a good sign that they actually don't have that capability or it's very new. And then just trying things out too, I think is if you are going to maybe go down a path and POC something, you always want to kick the tires pretty hard if you can.
Yes, very much. I would agree with that. I like the visualization there of just giving it a good shake.
Yeah.
Don't just take anyone's word for it, because
Yeah.
again,
It's-
salespeople are going to sell. That's their goal. That's their job.
mhm.
They have a commission to hit, and
Yeah.
it's what it is. In terms
Everybody's trying to make a quick buck from AI stuff too. So
also true. Yes,
yeah.
all the 2021 or 2020 to maybe 2023 startups who may be struggling to hit valuations need to hit those valuations
Right. Yeah.
before it's too late. Do you have any thoughts in terms of maybe where data is going in the next few years? Right, like obviously you're seeing things like AI agents. Like what are you actually implementing? What are you actually trying, and that you're seeing maybe some hope or some realistic outcomes there with?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely interesting. I actually, when I was at Data Council last week, me and my friend Colleen Tarto, we spoke on this. It was kind of around like AI viability, like how many people are actually should be doing AI. Is your data mature enough? Is your company do you even have a use case for it? And so our takeaway was kind of just like there's a lot of people like running a million miles a minute to take advantage of this stuff without really planning it like a strategic project you would for anything
Yeah,
else. So it's kind of the takeaway, but yeah, I mean, from my perspective, we're not doing a ton with it just yet, but I do think like, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of productivity gains in data. Like there
sure.
is a
Yeah,
lot of things that, I poo-poo AI a lot, but I think there are a lot of things that it does help with, and there's a lot of automation and workflow things that it will definitely speed up. So those are probably the things that I will be investigating for my team in the short term, and I can just imagine that that's going to get better. I think the places where again, like I don't think hallucinations are fully going away anytime
yeah,
soon. I don't think that's going to be solved. And so it's like figuring out where you maybe don't need things to be 100% accurate, but it helps you with either creative brainstorming or managing things that can be automated in some way that doesn't have to be perfect. Whereas something that's like, this data has to be actually accurate and we can't have hallucinations at all. I think those are the places where you're still going to need data teams focused on those workloads. So I don't know. That's probably a lazy answer, but it's a little hard to know.
I mean, that's always the thing with technology, right? Because you hit for some reason some new S curve, and all of what we thought was maybe hard to do or impossible to do suddenly becomes easy, and then we're like, okay, well, now we have to reassess. But I think based on what we're currently seeing, it's like, look, there's limitations. um
Hmm.
it's going to take 10 years probably to get some of the kinks out, and again,
Hmm.
unless we hit some S curve that suddenly it's like, nope, forget it, we're just now far beyond what we were uh 5 years ago. So no, I think
Oh,
that makes sense. And then of course
we
you
have
also
a
have to
way to
add in the
go.
fact that enterprise has to adopt it, which I know plenty
Yeah.
of enterprises that are like, we're not, you can't even use ChatGPT in or anything in, right? Like they're just like, look, we're not letting you touch this because we don't know what it's
Yeah, for
taking, what
sure.
data, where that data is going, who's going to own it, which makes sense. But so
Yeah, yeah. The security concerns definitely have a long way to go for sure before that can kind of enable innovation in those areas. And yeah, I think enterprise is probably the place where AI is going to be potentially the most impactful if it does take off, but it's going to be the slowest.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Besides AI, do you feel like there's any other terms in the data world that maybe have been overhyped, need to kind of drop away? Like anything in there?
Mm. I don't know. I feel like I don't want to say this is like unwarranted, but I actually kind of like the hype in this area about data modeling. Like I'm
Yeah.
like now I'm really bought into data modeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like people have been talking a lot about it, but I hadn't really seen like a lot of tangible like guidance on like, okay, well, what do I do? How do I actually do this? Until I started looking into this like beam method. And so it's a very like tangible framework of something that you can actually use and like put to work, and it's worked relatively well for us so far. And that so that I've actually been enjoying quite a bit. Like I feel like data modeling is like everyone's talking about it everywhere, but whenever I was seeing these things, I was like, okay, well, what do you mean? Like what does that actually translate into? And like what should I be doing? So I think that hype just needs to be a little more demystified potentially, but it's yeah, maybe we're getting there.
Yeah, I think Joe Reese is working on
Yeah.
another book, so on data modeling. So we'll see where that goes.
Hmm.
Um, let's see. Oh, someone's just asking, and since I was going to say we're kind of going to jump to Q&A. Someone is asking, can you elaborate on the beam data modeling?
Hmm. Yeah, so this is actually, yeah, I don't have the book with me, but I do. There is a book, and so it's based on a book that starts by talking about modeling like the events and the entities in your business. And so you're kind of thinking about events as fact tables and then dimension tables. And so you would go around to the business and start to learn about what are the events that take place in a business, what are the processes that take place, and just get as much information as you can to download from your stakeholders. And they've got a series of different tools in the toolkit that they offer. And so one of them is kind of like a whiteboarding exercise. So we used like a fig jam board, and we just had all these stickies. And we definitely didn't do it perfectly, but we kind of just asked stakeholders. We would have a whiteboarding session with them and just ask them, what would you want to know about our onboarding process, or like what is
Hmm.
important for you to follow as soon as somebody signs up all the way through completing onboarding? What are all the important things that you need to know? What are all the measures, and explaining to them what measures are and aggregates and things like that, and then what are all the dimensions? And there's I think it's a 3x3 grid for dimensions, where you kind of have like the who, what, when, where, why, all those things. And so you're kind of asking them these questions. Well, like when does this happen, and why does that happen, and how does
Yeah.
that happen? And so you start plotting all of those dimensions into each of those quadrants. And then from there, then you take that and put that into your event modeling. And so there's a couple different like frameworks and tools that they have in the book that makes it very tangible. So processes that you can go through with teams. And so that's kind of what we've been following end to end. I will say again, we definitely haven't been doing it perfectly, but even just kind of following it a little bit has been very, very helpful. And that's helped us to design basically all of our new BI models and then the topics that we have in Omni.
Yes. For the beam, was that a virtual meetup by chance?
It was, yeah,
All
yeah.
right, I'm gonna
I
just
think
put the
Daniel was
link
actually
here.
hosting it.
Yes,
So
I see
yeah,
that. I'm just gonna host, like, for anyone who wants
yeah.
to look more. I just sent the link of where Daniel is hosting that, so you guys can watch that as well. So no,
Hmm.
that's awesome. I think it's a good way of approaching, like you said. I think having a framework of how to data model
Yeah.
and kind of bring the business along. It sounds like as well. So it's not just, hey, let me go data model by myself. It's like, let me understand again the business, what they want, and things
Hmm.
like that. So cool.
Yeah, and then it gives you something too. You can come back to that whiteboard at the end and say, like, okay, well, can I answer all these questions? Because typically what they'll do is they'll just throw out every report they could possibly think of, and then you have to then come back and say, well, can we do that they asked for? Can they do that? And it's actually worked pretty well. Like we've covered most of the use cases where we have the data available.
Cool. Other question: what skills should I focus on as a data engineer in 2025? Any thoughts?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. I am very I'm bullish on soft skills, so I always go back to that. So I will skip on the technical skills. I think there's lots of technical skills to be learning for sure. But I think if I mean as a data engineer, maybe you're working less with stakeholders, so maybe the soft skills might be a little bit less important. But if you're more in an analytics engineering role, you do need to be able to work with your stakeholders directly, understand what types of problems they're trying to solve so that you can build, if you're building a BI model as your data product, you can kind of communicate, gather requirements, build, design data models, and then take that forward to them. So all of that requires like pretty lengthy communication skills. I think we're talking about data modeling. I think learning data modeling, learning some sort of format of data modeling is very important. I think Joe Reese has been saying like not having a data model is still a data model. And
Yes.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and so you don't want to learn that the hard way. And so, investing in data modeling can help to, if you're using DBT, it can help to really simplify your DBT project. And then things like specifically in DBT, like model optimization, automation, things like that. Those are probably some of the top ones I would think of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's some of them. Some of the skills haven't changed too much, like learning
Yeah.
Python, SQL, kind of as your baseline, like having some sort of database or data warehouse that you can work with. You referenced
Mhm.
Oracle earlier, so there's Oracle
Throwback.
SQL Server. If you started probably back when we started, one of my first projects was doing like a Oracle to SQL Server migration, so that was fun to learn the differences and the slight
Mhm.
nuances between two. You're like they're both databases. What could possibly be different?
Mhm.
And then all the differences you get to find through there.
Yeah,
And
SQL isn't SQL.
SQL
You
isn't
learn very
SQL, and
quickly.
then underlying engines aren't the same, and
Right.
how
Yeah,
everything gets processed, and you're like, oh, these little things. But yeah, so having those skills will always be the first place,
sure.
and then eventually you'll learn everything else. Um,
Yep.
well, I'm more curious on how you answer this type of question, because I get a lot of people who ask,
Mm.
which cloud should I learn? Um, my I've got some general answers, because you know all the clouds will eventually be useful. I'm not a fan of Azure personally,
Mm.
but I'm curious which one, or if you have a way that you like to explain this.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I have not used Azure. I've had GCP. I've used Redshift as a warehouse, and then now we're using Snowflake on top of AWS. So,
How
yeah,
did
I
you
mean,
feel going from Redshift to Snowflake?
it was a much better experience. Well, so I started with BigQuery, and then I went
Okay.
to Redshift, and then
Ooh.
I went to Snowflake. So I kind of went like down and then back up. Definitely, yeah. Redshift was interesting. Like we had reserved nodes, and so we were
Okay.
actually paying like a reserved amount. And so from
Oh,
like a
interesting.
cost perspective, it was very contained. It was like you knew what you would pay every month. You would never go over that, but of course your workloads would just suffer and be slower. But I
Yeah.
actually think it like made us worse at certain things because we just
Oh,
didn't
interesting.
care about how much money we were spending, right? So you would
Oh,
just build models and not think about compute costs and things like that. So if in that situation, if we were ever to have migrated to another tool, we would have been kind of in a tough spot. Whereas like with Snowflake, it's more expensive. Definitely. I think that it's very easy to spend a lot of money, but yeah, the capabilities are kind of there's tons and they're just growing. So yeah, personally, I'm a big Snowflake fan.
yeah.
Lots of great features, and we haven't delved into this yet, but like Cortex AI and things like that, that are just built in. Pretty exciting. So yeah, I don't know. As a newbie, it's hard, but I think like Snowflake has you get like a 30-day free trial or something like
Yeah.
that, so you can always spin up a test account and learn from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always a big fan of either, probably AWS is very popular, and then
Hmm.
GCP's maybe next. Azure has a lot of enterprise. Like it's hard to, like if you're going to work at enterprise,
Sure.
probably
Yeah.
run into Azure. So it
Yeah.
just depends kind of also what companies you're going to hope to work for.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes you don't have a choice.
yeah, sometimes like you learn
Often.
one tool, and I do find it funny that you went back to Redshift. I feel bad a little bit for Redshift, because I think the data world dogs on it a lot, but
Yes.
I we all we all had a bad experience probably with it at some point, where it's like, this is so much. How did we get no benefits from moving to the cloud? It feels like
Hmm.
a lot of
Hmm.
extra work and no benefits. So yeah. Let's see. Do you have any ideas for productionizing data engineering services? This one might be more on consulting, but what
Mhm.
markets of small, medium enterprises are showing a greater need for data engineering solutions lately?
Yeah, I don't know. That might be a question for you. I
It
don't know
might
the answer to
be.
that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, just as a quick, I mean, if this is on the consulting side, um, I'll, my experience is usually I'll do some sort of like 3 to 6 month accelerator. 6 month is less of accelerator, so a little more long term, but some sort of accelerator where I just help companies set up their data infrastructure, and have like a clear set of like, hey, here's the KPIs and dashboards we're going to build on the other end, and really focusing on how that's going to drive the business. So it's kind of a broad question, like what can you productionize? It's going to depend company to company. E-commerce has certain metrics they care about. Retail has certain ones they care about. Healthcare has certain ones they care about. So you just got to figure out which ones you're good at and how you would deliver that to actually connect to the business.
Makes sense.
Oh, this is funny. Friendly reminder to write ANSI compliant SQL. As someone going through a migration from Postgres to data warehouse, I'm having to waste time refactoring a lot of code.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
I am curious if like with this one, I think what is it, SQL glot should maybe help in the future. I know we're getting to a point where this might matter less, but I
Mm.
I do also know where this person's coming from.
Yeah,
So
I
that's my
know with
question.
DBT as well. Like if you're using DBT, I think I can't remember if it's DBT utils or something else, but there's a package that has like all kinds of macros that are like cross warehouse compatible.
Yeah,
So you can write, like date diff is the one I'm thinking of, which is like in Snowflake is like totally different than in Postgres. And so it's very annoying to change all those things, but you can just write with those macros instead, and then it kind of works across any database that you're working with. So obviously that's very DBT specific, but I think working with things like that make it a little bit more portable, I guess, is kind of
yeah,
nice.
yeah. That's uh, I guess it just comes down to like if you do use one of those tools, it's helpful to kind of fix some of those problems. But if you're not going to use those tools, definitely probably consider doing that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so this is a valid one. So with all these AI editors, you can build pipelines pretty fast. How do you kind of overcome the fear of maybe losing your job to automation someday in the future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I think it's definitely something that's on all of our minds as data people, probably people who are not even in the data industry. Like, I know software engineers are also seeing a lot of like vibe coding and stuff coming out. But I mean, I think this is just a good reminder to sort of keep focusing on elevating your skills. Like, if the majority of the work that you're doing is something that's very easy to automate or something that AI is going to be able to replace, aka it doesn't require any like logical thinking or critical thinking or human creativity or business domain knowledge or things like that, then that is probably right for automation or something that AI could replace. But it does still, we still very much do need human in the loop at this point. Like, I don't think that people are being fully replaced. So that's probably, maybe a couple years down the road still. So I think just continuing to elevate your skills, focus on automating the things that you can, so that you can then kind of elevate what you're working on and focusing on some of those like higher order thinking types of problems that AI is not going to be very good at.
Yeah, yeah. But again, we all think about it. We're all just trying to figure out the best way. Like Lindsay said, I think it's a while till things fully get replaced. One of the one of the things I constantly think of is faster isn't always better. That is to say, even if you make more pipelines and they're maybe arguably like good in the sense that as a isolated unit, it's well written. Um, in the bigger project and the bigger scheme of your business, there's only so much the business can do. Like someone still has to figure out, okay, but what's worth doing? Like I think I saw something on LinkedIn where they were talking about, oh, CEOs are going to do like meetings that they're not going to attend. They're going to attend with like an avatar, with their AI avatar. I'm like, but if this meeting isn't worth like the CEO's time, why is he like
Mhm.
even, or why is he or she like in this like situation where they need an avatar to do that meeting? Um, Constraints like are a thing, and they're in many ways good. They force you to, I don't know, think through things. So that's always
Mhm.
a thing I think about as well. Is like if you could make a million pipelines immediately, is that a good world? Like, do we actually do more, or is it just productivity for the sake of productivity? So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I still think there's sort of like a need to be able to see the bigger picture. And I don't know that AI is necessarily as good at that part yet. It's like connecting all the dots of different things and making a good decision on it. Yeah, like you said, you can build 1,000 pipelines, but is that a better output? I don't know. I would think not.
Yeah, but it makes migrations easier. Now, this kind of covering
True.
us. This is a good question that I often think about. So when you navigate kind of balancing between like those immediate requests, I need this data and long-term strategic initiatives, what strategies do you find most effective in ensuring your data teams are aligned with the evolving demands of AI and the business needs? Yeah, that's actually the end. Okay, cool.
hmm Yeah, this one for me is kind of still something that is challenging at times, especially in the startup world. But I try to reserve, at least an hour a month or like a couple hours. Like I block an afternoon once a month to sort of like take a step back and think about the bigger picture and sort of reflect on things that are going on and look at broader projects that I have. So to sort of like come up out of the weeds a little bit. I think as you get more senior in your career, that's sort of like your expectation is that you're sort of more out of the weeds. Working in a startup, in my current role, I'm definitely like very much still jumping between IC work, managing the team, and then sort of doing this more like strategic level planning. But if you're not able to take that time, or you're not taking that time to step back and like see the bigger picture, that it probably means that you have too much on your plate, or you need to hire someone to take more things off your plate so that you can delegate more to. But being able to take that time and think about the next sort of planning cycle and thinking ahead is a good way to ensure that the work that you're doing is aligned to the business, that you're communicating back to the business in an effective way as well, what impact you're having and where you're focusing your time. And then I think spending some time, looking at externally, what are some things that are coming up? What are some new tools? What are some new methodologies that I might want to bring into my team to either make things more effective or increase the impact, or look competitively, what are our competitors doing that we don't want to fall behind on.
Yeah.
So I think just separating the work a little bit, it's like you can't have that strategic level thinking when you've got all the busy work and the day-to-day work going on. You sort of have to block some time and focus on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Um, it is very easy just to be like, I'll just, put my head down and do lots of work. But then
Yeah,
you end up again looking up and being like, oh, I made a wrong turn somewhere in Albuquerque or something.
yeah,
And it's like, how do we get here?
yeah.
Um,
And
I think,
it's hard to protect that time too. Like I find sometimes I get really busy and I'm like, oh, I'll do that later, and then I'm like, oh, I haven't done this for a while, and it's like you really do notice the difference when you spend the time to do it.
yeah. Okay, one more question before we're getting kind of getting close to the top of the hour. Do you think there is a meaningful difference in data modeling for AI pipelines? If so, what?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will fully say that I'm not an expert on this topic at all. The data modeling that I've been doing is definitely more on the BI side of things. So I'm actually very interested to see Joe's book when it comes out and kind of see what his thoughts are going to be on this. But from what I have been reading and hearing, the thoughts are that AI modeling or AI data models for AI may take a bit more of like a one big table approach, just to give it like everything you can and try to give it as much context as you can. Again, I'm not an expert by any means, but I do kind of foresee that the data modeling needs will probably be different for AI than it is for BI,
Yeah,
because in BI you want to be able to enforce those relationships, have different levels of granularity, and enable metrics and dimensions and all that type of stuff. Whereas with AI, you're probably just trying to pack it with as much context as you can and as much information as you can.
yeah, yeah. I think we both read the same article from Joe.
Yeah.
I think he just wrote something about like one big table, and
hmm
just like that has been the approach for like ML projects for the last
Yeah.
while. I thought that was a good call out. How it's like, yeah, like that's how you would do it. You would give it like 1,000 columns and be like, here you go, figure it
hmm
out essentially. And then yeah, taking it back to like AI, where it's like often you're just giving it context. And then kind of letting it try to figure out the answer. I think that the question becomes more around like, are you asking it questions that are maybe specific to an individual user, so more like like your transactional kind of system type requests, or are you asking it more aggregate questions, so your standard like OLAP almost requests, and like
hmm
how does that look
hmm
like? Is it better? Can it aggregate well? Does it need to translate to SQL first? Can it do it itself
Right.
and pull all the information? And that's stuff I've seen less of. I've seen SQL or natural language SQL, and that's always hit or miss to
Yeah.
even today.
Yeah.
But better than it was when I first started, for sure.
hmm
But
hmm Yeah,
we'll
I mean,
see.
I think the consensus is probably that you still need a data model. You can't just like throw raw data at it and hope for the best.
Yeah, yeah, it really does come down to like, how much are you willing to risk error for some of these things,
Hmm.
right? Like, oh, you're willing
Hmm.
to risk error? Sure, have it all in raw data and let it try to do its best. But yeah, we'll see. Especially as models get bigger and maybe can handle larger context windows and things of that nature. It's like, well, if it can handle all the context and if it can figure out, really well what all that context actually means when I ask what's the revenue this year for,
Hmm.
these various regions. Sure, we'll see if it can eventually handle that well. But I think thus far, even people that I've worked with that focus on that type of workflow, are like, yeah, if you're okay with some error, sure.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
not,
exactly. Yeah,
probably don't.
yeah,
But we'll see. Awesome, cool. Well, I really appreciate this, Lindsay. We're at the top of the hour. I don't want to hold you too long, and thank you for everyone who showed up.
yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah, this was awesome. All right, I'm gonna hit end stream.